Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Reginald! I thought you should have some real cool, like, classic literary name.
I like that. And Reggie's fine. It doesn't have to be Reginald. It can be just Reggie.
I'm glad our relationship has reached that point. That is so nice. Right. All right, so welcome back to episode 2 of the Workplace Book Club, or as we fondly call it, Guys with Outlooks with Books.
So clever. So clever, Mike.
Oh, yes. So what are we doing today?
That's a hashtag, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that, but this is episode 2. I have included that hashtag, Guys with Outlooks with Books, in our first post, and we'll continue to do so. But this is sort of a work in progress. We're evolving this as we go, and the idea is that in my company HipSocket, we say wrestle and grow, and so we're going to wrestle with a little bit of classic literature. We're again going back to Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, same chapter even from last time, just another little nugget, just a couple pages over. And this is the way I want to sort of give people a little bit of a context before we just jump into this. But I was taught sort of a method of studying things called the inductive study method. Inductive study is very simple. It basically has you ask 3 basic questions. What does it say? What does it mean? And then, and only then, can you ask the final question, what does it mean to me? And so many times you hear people, discussing some passage they've read, and they'll immediately say, to me, what that says is like, well, I don't care what it says to you. What does it actually say first? I'm not even sure I understand the passage. So let's make sure we understand it. What does it say? And then we'll move on to what does it mean and what does it mean to me, the application of the passage, if there is one. So we're going to do that here with Pride and Prejudice. So we're back in chapter 10, and we're sort of jumping in midstream here, obviously, but we have something that's happened right before this, which is Mr. Bingley, one of the characters, says that he is so spontaneous that if he decided to leave the place he was living at, he'd be gone in 5 minutes, just so spontaneous. And his friend, sort of the main love interest in the story, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is very, sort of a deep thinker, very thoughtful person in that sense. And he says, no way, says, you're far too obliging to just at the drop of a hat leave a place. He said, even if Bingley were already on his horse, if somebody sort of touched his leg and asked him to stay longer, he would immediately oblige. And if they just said one more word, he might stay a month. So Mr. Bingley just oblige, not spontaneous. So Elizabeth Bennet, the Mr. Darcy's future love interest, they fight like cats and dogs, but eventually they'll end up together. Elizabeth Bennet defends Bingley by accusing Darcy of something. So that's where the quote begins, is what she accuses Darcy of. So here we go. She says, to yield readily, easily to the persuasion of a friend is no merit with you. And he says, to yield without conviction is no compliment to the understanding of either. And then she says this, you appear to me, Mr. Darcy, to allow nothing for the influence of friendship and affection. A regard for the requester would often make one readily yield to a request without waiting for arguments to reason one into it. I'm not particularly speaking of such a case as you have supposed about Mr. Bingley. We may as well wait, perhaps, till the circumstance occurs before we discuss the discretion of his behavior thereupon. But in general and ordinary cases between friend and friend, where one of them is desired by the other to change a resolution of no very great moment, should you think ill of that person for complying with the desire without waiting to be argued into it? So there is the quote. That's our short little passage today. So let me suggest to anybody who's listening along, you might want to just rewind the podcast and listen to that last little bit again. We'll have it up on the screen, for any of you watching on YouTube. pause it or whatever you need to do. And we will have a handout version of this. But at any rate, Mike, let's just talk about this. And as usual, you've had very little prep. That's sort of the idea here, is we're just sort of off the cuff, seeing if there's, golden nuggets to be gleaned here. But Elizabeth says this bit about, there are these general and ordinary cases, between friend and friend, where one of them is desired by the other to change a resolution of no very great moment. These decisions, these requests that are just the general and ordinary cases, friend to friend. And what does Elizabeth say, really should be considered here when you're making such a decision?
Well, I think she's saying that if to me the first thing that popped in my head was trust. If there's trust in the relationship, and somebody that you trust asks you to do something, then you don't need a plethora of arguments and all this kind of stuff. You just go, okay, I trust this person. They're my friend, and they need help. They need something. Then I will acquiesce. And
she says friend, several times in her speech. So that's obviously, she says friendship, friend and friend, between friend and friend, the persuasion of a friend. So it has to be something about that. Yeah.
Right. If it's somebody, so all you have to do is take the opposite of that and say, if it's someone you don't know, and you don't trust, and there is no friendship,
right.
and they ask you to do something, then it's probably best to ask a bunch of questions. Let's get into the particulars of this request and see that is it with merit, and then make a more logical decision on whether or not to do it or not.
Okay, you say that, so let's talk about Mr. Darcy's version of how this should go, because he doesn't make that distinction per se about, is it a friend, is it a stranger? He just says simply, to yield without conviction is no compliment to the understanding of either. And I would assume either person he's talking about there. To yield without conviction is no compliment to the understanding. So in his mind, what really should be considered in these requests and decisions that a person's asked to make?
Oh yeah, he's saying that there's a ton of variables to take into account. So what is the request, and what's it for, and who's asking, what's in it for me, what's in it for them, right? There's just we're gonna have this extended conversation, and hopefully surface all these things before we can make a decision to honor the request or decline it.
Right. And he says conviction, and in my head, you can think like passionate convictions about, your beliefs about the First Amendment, but I think it's more like convinced. I have come to a conclusion. This is what I think is the correct course. You wouldn't do that without, thinking through some things like you just mentioned, all those different variables. Well, all right. So with that being said, let's talk about, I've seen this play out, as have you. It probably plays out in our friendship, frankly. But I have colleagues in the workplace who emphasize truth, logic, objectivity, right? I have other friends and peers in the workforce, in the workplace, that emphasize relationships, or the impact that a decision is going to have on the people around them. Harmony in the workplace is really important to them. So maybe let's look at both of those sides and just talk about the consequences of having a view that really emphasizes one or the other. So let's start with the truth, logic, objectivity guy. If he really stresses that, emphasizes that in his decision making and so on, what are some negative consequences that spill out of that sort of mode of operation? Well,
I think it depends on who the other person in the conversation is. So if I'm a logic, objective, rational thinking, primary thinking person, then I
Right.
need you to make the case, right? Give me the 7 bullet points on why we should do what you're suggesting. If I'm dealing with somebody who's more on the people side of things and the relationship side of things, now I'm offended. You know, I've asked you to do this, and now you want me to provide 7 bullet points on why it is that you should do this.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't everything that we've been through, our relationship, the trust that we have, is that not enough? So now I'm questioning, right, how well are we connected? Do we share the same values and all that kind of stuff? So yeah, if you think about this, right, what we're talking about is we every now and then we talk about the DISC behavioral assessment.
Yep.
And so you're talking about the I's and the S's, right, the influencers and steadiness on one side, right, and the D's and the C's, the dominant conscientious, on the other side. And so the D's and C's would be that logic oriented, yeah, let's get the task done and I need concrete reasons. The I's and the S's would be, hey, this person needs help, they're a good guy, I trust them, let's go do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know, you brought up that the DISC paradigm. I can't help but think about a couple of episodes back, we talked about toxic high producers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the high producer, often we actually had some feedback from a listener saying, you know, wow, that's me. And this listener happened to be someone who has a technical role with his company and is frankly paid to have that logic side of his brain operating at peak capacity and is very good at it. You know, he's one of the highest producers for his department. And the danger there is that, you know, you're a D, you're a C, you're really emphasizing that. And the danger is you end up stepping on the feet of the people around you, emphasizing that. We want him to find all the problems. You know, he's diagnosing all the time and making money for his company. He's diagnosing problems within the organization. He's probably right. He probably has 7 bullet points that he could give you on this is why this is wrong. And here's what we should do about it. You're still going to have to bring along those people on the other side of the coin who don't see that that's as big a deal as some of these friendship issues or relationship issues that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And you can I can almost feel the pain from this person's perspective of the discomfort and how frustrating it must be to have all these things and know clearly what should be changed and not be able to get people to even give them a fair hearing. Right. Because I'm not approaching them in the manner which they believe things are of primary importance. That's a painful way to go through life.
Well, and we were talking about this earlier that, it's not who you know, or it's not what you know, it's who you know. I had somebody, I think I mentioned this on the podcast actually, that young guy, salesman for his organization. And he just, came up to me out of the blue and he said, hey, you got to help me get into management. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. What's going on? He goes, I've got an IQ of like 120. Like the end. That's all he said. That proves it. That proves it. Logically, I should be in that chair. And of course, that's not what gets you to that chair. It's not the fact that you know all the answers. It's that you have the ability to get people to buy into the vision and then follow you. So I kind of hurt for both sides of this, to be honest, because let's flip it around now. The other side is this person who emphasizes the relationships and so on, possibly at the cost of some of this objectivity and logic. Negative consequences that you see from that approach?
Oh, I think we've all had the experience of having a friend lead us astray.
Right.
Yeah. I've got this great idea. Are you with me? Sure. And then, next thing you know, you're in the back of a police car, right? There's 200,000 goldfish laying on the ground, just the usual. But so there, yeah, maybe asking a few more questions, maybe challenging, despite the friendship, despite the trust, maybe challenging, not necessarily the friendship or the relationship, but just the idea and its merits, right? What is this thing that you want us to do? I think of this, there's a scene from a movie. I don't know the movie, never seen it, but I always see this one scene, and the guy walks into the room. His friend is sitting on the couch, and the guy walks in the room, says, "I need your help. You can never tell anybody what we did, and we're going to hurt some people." And the guy on the couch looks up and says, "So whose car are we taking?" It's like, that's what I'm talking. That's a friend right there, right? That's who we're talking about in this, in this paragraph is, yeah, I'm just going to do it because you asked. Don't care if it's legal, illegal, right? But the relationship is such that that's what we do.
I love that. And it does, it really does speak to the fact that if you want results, if that's what you want, you probably need to have the right approach. But even if you have the right approach, you're going to have to go through the relationships with those around you to get to the results that you want. And so that's got to be a part of the equation. So let's sum it up with this: practical ways to live in this tension, because that's what I think we're both basically saying, is that it's not a problem to solve. Should I be relationship oriented? Should I be logic oriented? That's not the issue. What we're talking about here is that's a tension to manage. You have to have relationships. You have to have logic. You have to have both. So you have to live in that tension and manage the tension between those two. Would you throw out some ideas of practical ways you've seen that allow people to manage that tension?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is respond with some sort of affirmation. And it doesn't have to be a commitment affirmation, just, wow, that sounds interesting. Right?
Yeah.
That's unique. I hadn't thought of that. And then, that opportunity to find the middle ground. We've done a lot of good things. I've never questioned you. Can I ask you a few more questions? And so that ask permission, to ask questions, right? This sounds pretty interesting. Can I ask, a little more about it before we dive into it? And, and some of the great what questions that we've talked about over the years, right? So what is it about this that's most important to you? What is it that you hope to get out of this? What is it, that you ultimately see as the best outcome of this? Right. And just, cause the person that you're speaking with to maybe think it through a little bit deeper, and at the same time share with you a few insights about, okay, what are we really talking about here?
Love that. And notice that, there are going to be different parts of that are hard, depending on which you emphasize, right? If you're the logic person, it's slowing down to give that affirmation before you launch into some questions. If you're the relationship oriented person, the affirmation comes naturally, maybe even, just obliging the person and going along with it, but asking permission to ask some questions gives you a way to back into that. Okay, wait a minute. I really need to get the logic clear here and make sure I understand what's true about this and whether or not I have a conviction that goes along with this. So both sides benefit from that approach. Let me throw in. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to throw in, the idea of know thyself, right? So if you've never taken the DISC assessment, and there are some other tools out there that are phenomenal, that's a heck of a way for you to, essentially learn more about yourself and what kind of a person you are. And if it's a DISC report worth its salt, you'll probably get some further strategies on how to deal with this type of person versus that type of person. And we've covered one of the two axes as part of DISC. DISC is going to give you another one as well about sort of change and stability being another axis. It's phenomenal. It's very eye-opening, and your spouse should read it and laugh heartily when you get that report, because that's what generally happens when spouses see this. So it's another idea.
Well, and I think it's interesting, and having been a student of DISC for many years, I've discovered and just discovered just now that you'll often find that the 4 DISC styles are portrayed in books,
Yeah.
movies, storytelling. And so you'll
Right.
find that there's very often four main characters in any story, and
Yeah.
it's the tension between them because of their different personality styles that allows for great comedy, great drama, great tension, which is part of great storytelling. So in this case, with Darcy, Mr. Darcy and Bingley and Elizabeth, and all of a sudden we've got these four character styles, and then there's naturally tension that's there. So
Totally.
before this was a solidified concept, right? The ideas were always present that these different personality styles are gonna butt heads, and it's gonna make for interesting storytelling.
That's why it's called humor. The Shakespearean plays would have been plays about people who had their humors, their fluids that pulled you in one direction or another on these axes. There were four fluids in your bloodstream, and if you had too much of this one, it would make you very melancholic. If you pulled it too much this other direction, it would be another. And so they were humorous comedies. That's why humor is used as a word for comedy. So this is an ancient way to approach sort of thinking about how humans operate. Let me say, just sort of in wrapping this up, that the idea of wrestle and grow, like wrestle and grow in what way? And I would say organized, confident, and influential. Grow in your organization, your confidence, and your influence. And here what we've done is we've tried to give you a poll, right? We're with a couple of polls: logic oriented, relationship oriented. And we're saying that get organized in your knowledge of that being a concept, and now go out and wrestle with it, right? We've got you a handout that we'll provide on the website, but go out and wrestle with this and notice how it's happening. Try it out a little bit. These approaches that we've given you, and your influence will grow. I mean, we're not saying that it's all about influence and you controlling everything. We're just saying that you will see things starting to you're going to be able to impact things. You're going to be able to impact things for good. So we hope that's what people do as they go through these crazy podcast episodes that we're taking a shot on.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, interesting conversation. And while we're having the conversation, I have to admit, right, some of these new thoughts, new ideas come to mind. You start replaying situations in your head of past encounters with folks that went extremely well or went completely off the rails. Either way, it was something to learn from. So anything else that you'd like to share before we log off?
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you just said, because it doesn't take a genius, right? Like anybody can read this stuff and get some thoughts. Yeah, same here. And so let me just, as a little bit of inspiration, let me share with you. I've been reading my Jane Austen from this Complete Works of Jane Austen, and look how beat up my book is, Mike. It's ancient, right? So I bought it at a yard sale, I think. And in the front of it, it says Marjorie G. Torrance, December 1935. So this is an old book. It's coming up on 100 years, and that's her handwritten name. And on the other side is the stamp, right? And the stamp says, "Property of Home for Young Girls, 318 East." I can't read it. Something Parkway, New York City. So I just love the thought that I don't know how this ended up in my hands, but there was, I assume, an orphan named Marjorie who in the 30s was reading Pride and Prejudice. And I hope, Marjorie, if you're out there still, that this benefited you and you grew, right? You wrestled with this and you grew. But that's our offer to people is, this seems crazy. Why would anybody in the workplace spend time on this? I contend that there is a huge opportunity for growth if you're willing to wrestle with this. And by the way, it's going to unlock a part of your brain that you're not really using typically at work. And it's just going to make life that much richer for you, frankly. You're going to be a better human. So that's my inspirational message for the day.
That is cool. Yeah, and Marjorie would be 105 years old, approximately. So yeah, if she's on,
I have faith, Marjorie.
If she's on the interweb and the COVID hadn't got her, yeah. Mark has your book. Yeah,
Right.
want it back. Right. Just email me. Email address is in the comments below, and I'll make sure you get your book back. And I'd like to apologize on Mark's behalf. You know, he didn't know he was buying stolen materials. So
Right.
got that going for us. All right. Another great episode of Guys Without Looks with Books. And I know
That's right.
our announcer is very excited about the whole thing, so we'll turn it over to him.
Speaking of guys without looks.
And that's a wrap. The musings of Mark and Mike. No rights reserved, etc. Feel free to share and discuss what you heard today. Even claim the ideas as your own. Who'd want to do that? See you next time on It Doesn't Take a Genius. Thanks.
That's good enough.